Hey everybody, Daniel from Spacedock here. Now, have you ever thought, wouldn't it be fantastic if somebody made a game that was basically just Skyrim but Firefly? If so, you're in luck because Obsidian just did that, and you need to go and pick up The Outer Worlds. I finished the game yesterday at a 25-hour length playtime, which I think is fairly reasonable for an RPG, and I think it's one of the best little additions to the sci-fi genre we've had in a good few years. I'm going to be talking about it now largely from a story and world-building and character perspective rather than a gaming review kind of perspective. I'm sure there are plenty of other places you can find folks talking about the gunplay and the gameplay aspects and such, but for the moment I'm going to talk about the character work and the writing, both of which are really, really fantastic. I should clarify that I'm not going to be spoiling anything in this review with regards to the plot or anything like that, so it's just going to be in broad strokes. But personally I think where this game shines the most is in its person-to-person dialogue, its baseline character interactions, particularly with the companion characters. I have not been this invested in a set of companions in an RPG for a long time. The best characters by far are Ellie and Parvati, the sawbones travelling doctor Ellie and the ship's engineer Parvati. They both have really interesting backstories and a lot of fun in their companion quests. I really enjoyed all of their dialogue all the way through, but Parvati most of all. I've got to say, Parvati Halcombe is one of the best characters I've seen in a sci-fi property for a long time. Just an incredibly endearing, wonderfully written, basically Kaylee from Firefly, but even better is what this character was. And her companion quest in this game was wonderful. It was probably the best companion quest I've ever played. I won't say anything about the content of the quest specifically, just so you can experience it yourselves, but I had a huge smile on my face all the way through it. It was just beautifully, charmingly written, really heartwarming stuff, and you find yourself incredibly endeared to this character and to all of the other characters, the crew of the Unreliable, as is your ship in the game. I'd also like to take a second to praise the wonderful cast of voice actors in this game. A lot of relative unknowns in the industry, a lot of new folks, I believe, who all did a really good job. The casting was on point. The one that I was familiar with was Courtney Taylor plays your ship's computer, Ada. Some of you might know that she played Jack really well in the Mass Effect games, and I believe she was also the female sole survivor in Fallout 4. Excellent voice actor, and I really hope all of the other people who have entered the scene through this game will get more work in the near future, because they were all very talented folks, very skilled, and they really brought these characters to life.
Two atoms were strolling through Roseway when one of them exclaimed, "I think I lost an electron." "Really?" the other asked. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm absolutely positive."
The game has a wonderful immersive atmosphere for that kind of space cowboy sort of vibe. I think the game was at its most fun. I was most engaged and loving it the most in like the 5th or 6th hour when you first start to strike out into space and you get to go to some of the space stations and the other places, and it really nails down that kind of space smuggler, space transport captain vibe. It slows down a little later on. I think some of the places where this game sets its foot wrong is by having very, very long periods where you're like in swamps fighting dinosaur monsters and stuff like that, and while that is fairly entertaining, it doesn't feel quite as appropriate for a sort of Firefly, Han Solo kind of vibe as the rest of the game does. There's just something lost when you're fighting creatures and robots rather than people, and you're in this sort of sprawling setting of just kind of swamps and muck. Yeah, those parts were not my favourite parts of the game, but it does pick up a hell of a lot more in the third act when you get into some more city planets and stuff, and it gets back on form with its vibe there. I believe, rather interestingly, as this is kind of the opposite case for things like Fallout and the Elder Scrolls, I think in this game the character writing was a lot stronger than the world building. In Fallout and the Elder Scrolls, I feel like the world building is really, really excellent, but the character writing and the main quest plot lines are always very, very mediocre. The opposite is true here, or not quite the opposite. The world building in the Outer Worlds is good. It's not as good as Fallout or Elder Scrolls, but it's perfectly serviceable and relatively interesting. But the game is far better at its small character interactions and its banter and its dialogue and its kind of humorous Joss Whedon style back and forth than it is in the actual overarching story or the world. The main plot line is good enough. It's fairly engaging. It had a couple of moments that I was quite proud of myself for having picked out that they were coming. You can kind of do that. There's little bits of information that might lead you to deduce things and then be proven right and be happy about them. And they're not like stunningly obvious, so you can kind of pat yourself on the back for that. But yeah, the storyline is relatively functional. It's fairly satisfying. It's not going to blow your socks off or anything like that. But really, what you're getting from this game the most is the companion characters and the fun dialogue, and the various recurring characters throughout the story, the quest givers and such. People you find around the world are always very interesting, and Obsidian really brought some fantastic writing to the table in this game. The setting and locations are fairly satisfying. There's some really interesting places in this game. The world map will mislead you somewhat, as it's filled with like loads of different named planets on the solar system map, but most of them are unvisitable as they're either gas giants or uninhabitable dwarf planets. Perhaps they will be used for DLC, but really the majority of the game takes place on 2 planets, Terra 2 and Monarch. Terra 2 being the more interesting of the two, I think, because it's more of a habitable, civilized world, whereas Monarch is just basically a big swamp. Obviously the game's central themes are kind of anti-capitalist and satire against corporations, and it can get a little bit grating when it's made the same joke a hell of a lot of times. It's very, very funny, especially in the early moments of the game, where the whole running joke of these corporations treating people as assets and not having any kind of emotion for anyone. It's got the dark comedy to it that stays alive all the way through. The game couldn't have been much longer without that getting really annoying, because you can only make the same joke so many times.
Here, you can have my saber too, for patching me up and all. All Spacer's Choice weapons are now 30% less likely to malfunction. You've tried the best, now try the rest. Spacer's Choice. Yes, nailed it that time.
But the world is not limited to this corporate thing. There are various other interesting parts to it, and it's just a fairly interesting setting, being isolated out in this colony, a long way from Earth. Being the captain of a sublight-only ship, and it really makes you plugged into the fact that sort of the happiness of this colony, or the state of this colony, is important to your well-being. On that account, I think there's only one small problem I have, and it's really not something the game can do much about, because the game needs to happen, is that your character's motivations are a little bit vague. The fact that essentially you're woken up from stasis, and as I'm sure you'll have seen in the trailers, you're basically tasked with freeing everybody else who was in stasis with you and getting them back into consciousness and out in the world. But really, I didn't find myself caring that much about doing that, and it kind of, there's this, you get to the ship yourself and you get your own crew, and as soon as that happens and you're free and you have your ship, you feel like, at this point, I would want to just strike out and like be my own person. I'm not that invested in this problem the colony is having. But you do get the option to say so to a character at one point. And their argument is your ship doesn't have an FTL drive, and you live in this system, so really you have to make sure it's a happy and contented place for your own sake.
Without a skip drive, good luck. You'll be dead before you make it to the nearest star. Look, I admire your optimism, but the sad truth is you're stuck here. You, me, and the rest of this colony. We're all skating precariously around the edge of oblivion together. None of us are leaving Halcyon alive, so we may as well make it a better place, and we can start by reviving the hope.
And that's fair enough. It's a decent enough argument that allows the game's story to actually happen. In that respect, you're going to have to accept that the game kind of forces you into a bit of a savior, hero, or villain kind of capacity to allow the game to happen rather than keeping it completely freelance. But this happens in every game of this nature. It happened in the Smuggler story in the Old Republic, and the Bounty Hunter story as well. They always end up getting drawn into larger affairs. But in spite of that, the game never loses its grounding, it never loses its wonderful themes about the importance of the camaraderie and of personal decision-making independence and freedom. It has that wonderful found family vibe with your crew that evokes Firefly. The whole game evokes Firefly in a hell of a lot of ways. It's clearly very, very potently inspired by Firefly and by Cowboy Bebop and other works like that. But yes, overall, if you want a space smuggling, space criminal, space outlaw simulator with some wonderful, heartfelt, beautiful dialogue and some fantastic characters, something that will really get you emotionally engaged in its world and in its interactions, then this is more than worth the price of admission. I strongly recommend The Outer Worlds. Another feather in Obsidian's cap in the storytelling department, I think. And once you have played through the game, please do tweet at SpacedockHQ. Let me know what you thought of the cast of characters, who your favourite was, or even in the comments below this video, and what you thought of the companion quests, if you got as much out of them as I did, because I really did enjoy those. It was really, really lovely to sit through some of them. It did a fantastic job of making you care about those people and their arcs, and I hope we get to see more of those characters in a sequel in the future or in DLC. I'd love to see more stories with them. That's it from me overall. I heartily recommend the game. You should check it out if you haven't already. Be aware of spoilers in the comments below this video, as I'm sure people who have played it will want to be talking about it. That's The Outer Worlds, available on console and PC. Very much worth your time. Really strikes me as a return to form for sci-fi storytelling in the gaming sphere, something that's been lacking for a while, I think. So I hope you'll check it out, and thank you all very much for watching. This is Daniel from Spacedock, signing off. Thank you for watching Spacedock. If you're interested in supporting the channel, please do check out the links on the screen right now or in the description below for our Patreon and channel membership services. Anything you can pledge goes towards improving our team and our equipment and allowing us to put together bigger and more exciting video projects for you guys on the channel.